So we're going to start again with the morning practice. How do I get that out of the way? Okay, excuse me, just slideshow from beginning. Right. So as we did last week, we're going to start, with this Chenrezig practice. Chenrezig being the embodiment, the kind of totally awakened mind and bodhicitta, the embodiment, the symbol, the deity, whatever we want to call it, what's comfortable for our mind, of encompassing, embodying that quality, compassion and bodhicitta. So again, with all the heads and the arms, signifying that he's all-seeing, looking at and gazing upon all sentient beings with different skills and abilities. That kind is reflected in the different colours, the numbers of the heads and also the colours of the heads, showing it performs different activities for us to benefit us. And all the arms, of course, showing that, again, that he's embracing every being. No being isn't sort of encompassed or held in Chenrezig's compassion, so that includes us. And also the eyes, can't see in this image, but Chenrezig has in the palm of his hand, each hand, the 1,000 arms, each hand has an eye. It's a difficult one to paint, you have to paint an eye in each hand, and there's 1,000 hands. So that's showing that he's gazing, he knows the method, he has this insight, the sight to be able to guide each and every being, including ourselves, according to our level of mind, what we need right now. So yeah, we're going to start with doing the sort of prayers, the mantra, just to clean the mind. So these practices, create an environment where we're able to listen, reflect, and meditate on the teachings, and just get the most benefit from the teachings, whether we're listening to teachings, whether we're doing meditation. These practices create that inner environment for us to get the most out of additional things we're doing, like teachings, reflecting, meditating. They set up the mind to be able to absorb whatever we want to absorb and learn and kind of bring into the mind, develop whatever realizations we want to develop. We have these kind of preliminary practices that set up the mind in that, into this environment where we just, so our mind becomes like a sponge, so it can really soak up the teachings, soak up the understanding of the topic that we're talking about. In this case, it's death and impermanence. So let's take a few minutes. We're going to do a few minutes of just body scan. Breathing in deeply. First of all, just a couple of big deep breaths. Breathing in, exhaling any stale energy in the body and mind. A couple of long deep breaths to inhale, exhale. A few breaths, just scanning through the body from the crown all the way down to the tips of the toes, scanning, releasing, relaxing, like giving ourselves a massage, all the way down through the body, just connecting and grounding our energy in the body through the scanning process. And then for the next few minutes, just sitting with the breath, you know, the process of the breath, the natural inhalation and exhalation. Sitting with that awareness of the breath. And then with the mind a little bit more settled, just take a moment in that environment to reflect on your motivation. Why we're here this evening, just clarifying that in your own mind. So just to add to that, you know, just reminding ourselves that the purpose of, you know, studying the Lam Rim is to wake us up from delusion, you know, wake our mind up and gradually develop it on the path to enlightenment. To gradually connect with the deeper truth. So each time we study a topic, ideally we connect more and more to our ultimate truth, more and more to the nature of our mind and consciousness, who we are. It's a step-by-step process and development of the mind. And the highest goal in this path is, on top of recognizing our truth, the nature of mind or consciousness, is to be able to develop all the qualities and abilities to benefit others, to guide them, all the skill, all the different inner qualities and realizations, the mind-body chitta, kind of skillful bodhisattva, become a skillful bodhisattva who can also guide others out of delusion, you know, out of suffering, guide them on the path to the Four Noble Truths, guide them to also awaken in them this mind, precious mind of bodhicitta. But, like anything we learn in life, we need to develop that ourselves. We have to develop all the inner causes and conditions of inner development, the wisdom wing of emptiness, the compassion wing bodhicitta. We need to develop these two wings of enlightenment. And this is what we find in the Lam Rim, this path that's been tried and tested by so many holy beings, so many saints, sages. So how fortunate it is we have this kind of golden opportunity at the precious human rebirth to be able to study and explore and develop it in our heart and mind. So again, not just for ourselves, but for all living beings, friends, family, those we know, we don't know, all the beings as vast as space, not just in the human realm, the hells, the animals. Just expand our mind out for all those living beings. May I become, a guide, a protector, a bodhisattva, a Buddha for every living being, by studying, practicing, and developing these qualities and realizations in my heart and mind. And so to help us do this, we do this practice of visualizing the kind of embodiment of who we want to become, this great Buddha or Bodhisattva Chenrezig, and who particularly embodies compassion in the space before us, just like we see here in the vast open sky, appearing like a rainbow, or like the kind of moon, the full moon in the sky, seated on a divine lotus and moon cushion. The arms are like a vast aura of white light, radiating out, just like the moon reflects on the whole world. The arms reflect and embrace myself and all living beings. And we feel kind of the gaze of Chenrezig on our face, that moon-like energy, that feel, that love on our face, the Chenrezig, embracing me and embracing all sentient beings. We develop whatever understanding we have of this mind of refuge, seeking refuge in that outer being who embodies those qualities, to develop the qualities within us, to develop that potential we have within us. It's the purpose of refuge. So we recite once in English, Tibetan, twice in English. Sangye chodan sogi chognamla chanchu bardu dani kyapsuchi dagi chinsogi besonamgi drola penjir sangye drupar shog. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. Again, just affirming whatever dedication we have to the path to enlightenment for ourselves and all sentient beings. That's what we're doing there. Then we generate the kind of ground of bodhicitta, these four immeasurable thoughts. Based on these thoughts developing in our mind, then we really have this ground for developing the higher levels of states of bodhicitta. So we always reflect in these as the preliminaries as well. Immeasurable equanimity. How wonderful it would be if I and all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for some and hatred for others. It's taking a moment for that thought. Immeasurable love. How wonderful it would be if I and all sentient beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. Immeasurable compassion. How wonderful it would be if I and all sentient beings be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. Immeasurable joy. How wonderful it would be if I and all sentient beings never be separated from the bliss of higher rebirth and liberation. Then practicing the limit generosity. In order to receive, to really open up, we need to be able to give, you know. So we offer, it's like a sort of pure land in our hands. And if we don't know the mudra, we just imagine, you know, try to visualize this world system, all the beautiful things within it, as well as our own possessions, our body, things we're attached to. We're trying to release a little bit, releasing our mind attachment just through visualization at this, you know, juncture. And later we're offer, you know, through the power of familiarity, we can offer more. So whatever we can imagine, beautiful flowers, delicious food, lights, anything by our possessions that we feel, you know, there's some clinging to, we just visualize and imagine offering to the heart of Chin music. 조근 남닥시나 주발쇼 예람 그르라나만달라감네야다야미. Then, you know, another part is always making requests, you know, asking for something. Once we've made offerings, we've done the preliminary prayers from our side, then we can ask, you know. So we say together, please bless my mind to become Dharma, Dharma to become the path, and the path to be without obstacles, that I may cease all wrong concepts and immediately generate the two precious body cheetahs. So we feel Chenrezig's really happy with our requests, our prayers. And, you know, from his heart, this 3-syllable, here we can see in the image here in the center. So he has this suckle in his heart. And from that, it's the essence of compassion, a powerful stream of light and nectar comes entering through our crown and just kind of washing away any resistance, any sluggishness, any inner or outer obstacles that we're feeling, and just imbuing us with that kind of sense of love, compassion, equanimity, joy, whatever we need, you know, refreshing our mind for the class. So we'll chant a few Mani Padme Hums together. Mani Padme Hum, 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 Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum, 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 Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum, 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 Mani Padme Hum. Taking a moment just to feel the energy of the mantra. It's like the syllables and the sound, that light all radiates through our whole being, waking us up, waking up our mind, waking it up to the Dharma, you know, waking it up with the qualities of compassion, loving kindness, clear wisdom. And gradually, like mist in a mirror, Chenrezig starts to dissolve from top to bottom. And this small ball of like brilliant light, like bright like 1,000 moons. That soft light comes to the crown of our head. And again, just blessing our body as it moves through our crown. Purifying our body, karmas with the body, get purified. So it touches our crown chakra. That soft light moves down through our central channel in the body into the throat chakra, cleansing our speech, empowering our speech with, skillful speech, speech that doesn't harm, only helps, and filling that chakra with white light. Moves down more and more into our heart chakra and then kind of explodes. The light explodes or radiates through our whole being. It hits the most subtle part of us, our subtle mind that goes from life to life. That's the consciousness that carries on with all the imprints, all the experience. So it hits that and illuminates it. Its nature is clear light. So that clear light just radiates through our whole being, and we sit for a moment being one with that light, one with that quality, Chenrezig. Okay, so I'm going to share the next PowerPoint for the class. Sorry. 1 second, I need to, I never quite know how to move this bar away, the black bar. It's in the way. Bae, do you know how the black bar, oh, hold on, no, that's him, sorry. Slideshow. There we go. Sorry about that. Right. Here we are. Okay, so welcome. We're in session 2 now of this course on death and rebirth, kind of trying to deepen our experience of death, why we have to think about death, what the death process is, and what kind of practices we need to do to set up our mind so it's, we have a good death. That's going to be one of the other classes that we talk about towards the end, what practices are really good to do now, and especially to rely on at the death time. So again, just to clarify, last week I think I had these 2 images on the screen, but I don't think I really sort of clarified again what they meant. So for me, it just felt like, again, sort of a good visual image of where we are right now, where precious human rebirth. It's like, it's, as I mentioned, that analogy last week where we have, as Pabonka Rinpoche says, in liberation in the palm of your hand, one of the traditional Lamrim texts, we've been carrying, we've been in sort of states of existence, whether in the human realm or other realms, where we haven't had all these freedoms and opportunities. But where we are right now, standing with these 8 freedoms and 10 richnesses in our lives that we discussed last week, it's like we've kind of got this golden opportunity, we've won the lottery. And it's kind of like, or we could say it's like we've set the stage for part of the stage for enlightenment. We need to keep developing these levels, inner levels of spiritual development, different foundations to develop up to the mind, to realize the nature of consciousness, to wake us up, ourselves up for delusion completely, to overcome ignorance. We need to keep setting the stage. So it's almost like with the precious human rebirth, here we are, you know, we've got the stage set up, there's some lights turned on, but we're not there yet. We don't have the full stage set up. So the bottom image is kind of showing, you know, once we've developed bodhicitta, the two precious bodhicittas, which are the wisdom realizing emptiness and this kind of high level of bodhicitta, the 10th level, a bodhicitta, bodhisattvahood, then we're like a Buddha, you know, we've achieved Buddhahood. So the stage is fully set in a way. It's kind of golden and glowing. Everything's ready to benefit sentient beings, you know, to do deeds to benefit sentient beings. We're most qualified to do that. So, you know, I don't know if we're completely, you know, some of us might be further on than the first image, but either way, it kind of shows, we're so fortunate we've set some of the stage so far for an enlightenment in terms of our inner development. So again, it's just, you know, really thinking about this is like because it's rare, you know, to have this situation, as I mentioned again in the analogy last week with the turtle coming up every 100 years and poking his head through that, you know, the chances of him meeting that yolk that's, you know, just bobbing around on an ocean that's like the Pacific or Atlantic Ocean, it's that vast, you know. So the chances of us popping our head up through that golden yolk, meeting it when we only come up every 100 years, we only receive a human rebirth now and again. So to have the golden opportunity to meet the Dharma, you know, to meet these lineage of teachings where, you know, we have, what's fortunate about Tibetan Buddhism is we have so many masters who embody the qualities, who are living, you know, who are living embodiment of the teachings, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And I have, you know, definitely Lama Zopa Rinpoche. I was very fortunate to live in his house, and there's no question he wasn't, you know, I was, you know, very different from me. His ability to benefit beings, his, you know, his quality of mind, all these different inner qualities and outer qualities were like vast, you know. So it's like, it was just unbelievable just to have these beings who embody these qualities with us and teaching us and guiding us. So it's very, very precious, you know, and to be at some point in their, you know, in their presence, to be able to serve them, to be able to hear teachings, because they, you know, the power of their speech really, really benefits our mind. So any understanding I have to the Dharma comes from my teachers, you know, as it all does really, you know, but we especially have this golden opportunity because we have masters who embody, who are living and embody the teachings. Not all spiritual lineages have that, you know, so we're incredibly fortunate in this tradition. So yeah, so we want to try, you know, so now it's not just like we think about precious human rebirth, oh, I'm so fortunate, and then maybe we just feel happy and that's it, you know. So the next contemplation is about, well, what do we do with this precious human rebirth? How do we not waste it? You know, and that's why we have to think about death and impermanence. That's the next step to kind of prepare the mind to develop realizations. You know, death and impermanence is a realization itself, but that one really protects us from not wasting this opportunity we have. So first of all, before we go into the kind of Buddhist approach of thinking about death, I just wanted to go into a little bit about where we are right now in our Western culture. Just touch on those, you know, because they still, you know, they probably still influence some of us, you know. And we have a little bit of habit, as we were just discussing a few as before the class, that, you know, in Western culture, there's a lot of like, don't talk about it syndrome. You know, fear and avoidance, because we don't know what it is. We don't really understand it. You know, for various reasons, you know, in the death in Western culture, it's become a sort of uncomfortable topic, an unsettling topic. So even when we move into the Buddhist, you know, teachings on it, we can still feel that discomfort in our mind, right? We still feel like it's a bit hard, you know, to talk about. So, but it's wonderful. We're coming to this class. We're trying to open up about it. So that's, you know, but that can still influence us because we haven't been sort of brought up in an environment where it's talked about openly. It's even like, you know, even at funerals, everything's kind of black and dark and difficult for, you know, in many cases, you know. So, yeah, I think we still have some influences of that from our culture. The other thing that, you know, in the West, another way where, another interpretation of death can come from a religious background. If we have had a Christian background, we can, we might, based on a Christian background, there might be an openness to afterlife, But for most, certainly with a Christian background, it tends to be like a heaven or hell situation. And I don't know much, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of discussion about the continuity, consciousness, and other forms of where we may or may not be reborn, So again, that can still create a lot of fear and challenge and difficulty when we're faced with maybe just two options, for future rebirth. And then another way that, certainly in the West, it can just be viewed as a sort of process, a biological process. And we just think about, rather than, we just try and make up some ways to prolong life, rather than accepting it as a natural part of life. We just, there's all these medications these days to try and prolong life as much as possible, so we don't need to go there, anytime soon. Again, it's kind of can be quite fear-based, So a lot of our, certainly I would say in Western culture, a lot of our approach to death seems, from my view, to be quite fear-based, but not a healthy fear-based, unhealthy fear-based, because it's kind of very unknown. Or we don't have, we just don't know much about the death process in Western culture. And, and current, I think more in modern times as well, there's also people coming up with their own ideas about death, and just making their own personal choices about it and having their own ideas, because maybe they're not satisfied with the Christian view. They're maybe not looking into Asian religions, Asian cultures, Asian, like Hinduism, Buddhism, they know much more about death. So they're just making some of their own ideas up about death, So again, I think when we go into these topics, some of these do influence us because we've been brought up in that culture. Any comments? Anybody agree with that? Disagree? Any questions? Nothing?
Yeah. I would say I grew up as a Mormon, raised in a Mormon church, and had quite a strict interpretation of heaven and hell, and some variation, grades of variation of those eternal lives. But I've come in my lifetime to understand that various Christian disciplines have lots of different interpretations. It's very graded. Afterlife expectations that are presented, I find.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. No, it's interesting to know. I mean, I just, coming up from, certainly from myself, I wasn't really a practicing Christian when I was young, but certainly from going to church at that time, sort of 40 years ago, that's what we were mostly presented to, but maybe it's a bit more modern now, a bit more forward thinking is what you're saying?
I am, yes. I find it more just accepting there's some Christian denominations that don't even believe there's really a hell, that you'll be in some sort of pleasant sort of situation. The hell is something else that's not fire and brimstone, in other words.
Okay, right. Okay, well, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, we do have that. That is a possibility in the Buddhist tradition. It is a possibility, but again, it's not because someone's sending you there. As you know, it's
right.
because the deeds that we create or collect in this and past lives. So anyway, yeah. So I just wanted to cover that anyway, in case, depending on where we're all at, with our sort of feeling of death right now, just connecting with that in the light of, recognizing that, and then sort of moving forward with kind of what is the Buddhist perspective of how we think about death, how we approach death. So starting off generally in the Lam Rim, when you study the traditional Lam Rim text, what the start of the text usually starts with thinking about the advantages and disadvantages of remembering death. So it's basically what happens when we think about death, and what's the pros and cons, or, if we don't think about death, what happens? And if we do, what are the benefits to us, So that's what we're sort of covering tonight. Why is it beneficial for us? So like anything, whatever we want to study in life, we always, whether we actually sit down and make a list of the advantages and disadvantages, we may not, but in our mind, we go through that process. If we want to study something, think about something, we, you know, or sort of studying and think about something more deeply or understand something more deeply, any course we go into, we're going to think about the pros and cons, you know. So it's a little bit about, that's kind of what we're doing this evening, you know, to set the environment for us to go into more deeper reflections on death, making the mind kind of understand why we have to think about it. Why is it important? What are the advantages of that? So that's the sort of ground we're covering tonight. So what happens when we don't think about death, you know? So this is a quote by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Without remembering death, so maybe if you like to read it loudly or just silently, without remembering death and impermanence, we may imagine we will live forever. We may imagine we don't have to prepare for death. Or we may think that the only purpose in life is to enjoy ourselves as much as possible. Then with such attitudes, we may become careless and fail to do what is really important with our lives. So it already makes some sense to us, right? So what we're going to do now, just to sort of break down that quote a little bit more, in terms of, you know, how thinking about death, again, in light of these three levels of spiritual happiness that we want to accomplish on the path that I spoke about last week, the happiness of future lives, how it's important to think about death in the context of taking care of future lives, how it's important to think about death in the context of trying to achieve liberation, you know, freedom from the cycle of birth and death altogether, and how it's important to think about death in the context of the greatest purpose, you know, to achieve full enlightenment, to develop our mind fully on the stages and the paths, to fully awaken. So the first one here that Rinpoche said, without remembering death and impermanence, we may imagine we will live forever. Well, it doesn't really, of course, we kind of know that we're not going to live forever. But if we really check up, and maybe it's not true for you, maybe we've been doing a lot of reflection on death and impermanence already, but there is a kind of feeling there that we kind of feel like we're going to live a long time. Yeah, that death's somewhere sort of far off there in the distance. So it might not be a feeling of forever, but there's definitely a sense that, you know, we're going to live, you know, somewhere far off there. It doesn't, the thought of death, for most of the time, I would say, without the realization of death and impermanence, for most of us, the thought of death is kind of quite far away. So this is what we would say in the Buddhist tradition. This is the first Mara. And again, mentioned Mara last week, or delusion, you know, this sort of delusion in our mind that's preventing us from, you know, sort of really picking up our practice. You know, that thought that, well, I'm going to live a long time, so I've got time to practice, I've got time to do things. That's kind of a danger, you know, because it causes us to delay our practice. It causes us to get more involved in sort of the business of this life. So that's what, you know, so this is kind of why we need to reflect on death and impermanence, because it kind of creates a laziness, a spiritual laziness, this feeling that we're going to live forever. And actually, it's a deluded state of mind. Because when we think about it logically, well, we're definitely not going to live forever. And we don't even know if we're going to live tomorrow. I mean, I'm down in the Gompa and Vajrapani. I can't say for sure that I'm going to be able to walk up the hill tonight. I mean, who knows what could happen? You know, there could be an earthquake, a fire. We just, you know, of course, with some clairvoyance, you might know these things clearly, but at our level of mind, we really don't know for sure how long we're going to live. But there's an ongoing sense in the mind without reflecting on death and impermanence. There's a sense that our life's going to be quite, you know, we're going to die somewhere far away. And so what that does is it tends to cause us to put off our practice, to put off, you know, creating the inner causes and conditions for our spiritual awakening. It creates a laziness, a sluggishness in the mind. So reflection on death and impermanence really puts a spotlight on what is important in our life. You know, it kind of creates this sense of urgency, you know, when we really reflect deeply, that kind of, it chips away at that feeling of, I've got a while, I've got a long time. It starts to chip away at that and bring death much closer, as, you know, sort of face-to-face feeling with death. So Rinpoche, Lama Zopa Rinpoche told a story, something about his, I think, Tibetan relative, a relative from Nepal or Tibet said, you know, well, I'm going to practice the Dharma when I'm old, you know, I'll recite Om Mani Padme Hum when I'm older. Because typically in Tibetan culture, you know, it's a lot older that once the elder community tend to do a lot of prostrations, recite many mantras. So he just thought, well, I'll just practice the Dharma when I'm older, you know, just like them, you know. So again, this comes about because we haven't really thought about our preciousness, our opportunity, how we have this potential to achieve enlightenment, and how we don't know what's going to happen when we're older. So we need to practice now. So again, just in the light, I just wanted to sort of spotlight as well to help us understand, because one of the, what would you say is the main obstacle for us? What does death and impermanence help? Well, what's the main delusion it starts to chip away at? Anyone hazard a guess? Do we have hands up? Or you can say in the chat, put your hand up. What's the main one that we're, because again, this whole process is each of these kind of, you know, topics are chipping away at certain sort of delusions or wrong views in our mind. So what one's death and impermanence helping to heal? Nobody?
We're gonna live forever.
I couldn't hear that.
We think we're going to live forever.
Maybe you can put it in the chat. Bay, you must know.
Oh, well, Eleanor said that she said we think we will live forever.
Well, that's true, but there's a sort of delusion in the mind, something particular. So what are our main delusions that we've got in our mind, like ignorance and, you know, we've got these other ones. So what one's death and impermanence an antidote to?
Joe?
I think it would be attachment to this life, this material world, and thinking that this is the true reality when it isn't.
Yes, very good. That's right. Yeah. So the main delusion that this meditation does is it chips away at our attachment, you know. So I just wanted to sort of highlight a little bit how attachment works as we go through this process, through what we call Lama Tsongkhapa highlighted these 4 mistaken concepts. So just as an aside, for those of us who are doing the test, I won't be able to send you the PowerPoint this time. So from here onward, of course, there's going to be some readings that I'm going to suggest at the end of the class. So you should be able to use them for your test. But also for here onward, if there's certain things, you might want to write them down in case, you know. So just, you know, to mention, this might be a good one to write down. So because for me, these are the real juice of the teachings, you know, these really extract the essence, these 4 mistaken concepts of what we're trying to work with, what we're trying to work on, what is our experience day to day, and how we kind of have to transform that into the, you know, into the right experience, from the wrong concept to the right concept. Or they're kind of our blind spots that are kind of haunting us all the time, you know, we don't see them. You know, a blind spot's something we don't see. So these are really, really good for highlighting what it is we don't see and what it is we kind of need to see. So the first blind spot we have, Lama Tsongkhapa says, is that we have this habituation due to attachment, due to also the ignorance, you know, everything comes from ignorance, but especially also to attachment, you know, from seeing the impure to be pure. So what does that mean? That means that, you know, thinking that our body, our enjoyments, our place that we live in, we kind of think that they're pure, maybe they're okay, you know. We don't really question, you know, why do I have to wash all the time, you know? Why do I have to always clean my house? Why do, you know, certain enjoyments that we have, they always run out, you know? Because the nature of them is impermanent. And the nature of them is impure. Even our body, you know, our body is subject to decay. Even when we come into this world, it's gradually, even as a baby, we're gradually aging, eh? And the body itself is impure, you know, it's not something pure like a Buddha body. Buddhas don't have to shower. You know, when they have enjoyments, they last forever. They just experience bliss forever. You know, Buddhas live in pure places. They don't have to clean all the time. So wouldn't that be nice? But for us, so it's kind of like these four concepts just highlight the Four Noble Truths, this truth of suffering, you know, that we're in this place due to attachment. Attachment is like some sort of mud on the mental continuum. And because we're grasping and clinging at phenomena, we don't see them correctly, we create this impure body through the power of karma and delusions. And it's subject to decay and sickness and death, you know, and again, most of that's happening because of the grasping, clinging mind. So that attachment, you know, that sort of blind spot is causing us to always be born in impure bodies and to perceive, somehow we still perceive it as okay, you know, until we sort of start to break down and question what's really happening in our lives, which we do when we enter into Buddhism. The next strong concept, and again, you'll find these, some of you might be familiar, you've heard them before, but you'll find them often, you know, throughout the Lamrim teachings. The next one, again, due to the power of attachment in our mind and also the power of ignorance, you know, but again, ignorance is it's the deepest one, it's the hardest one to see in our mind. So we start to chip away at that by, first of all, working on the attachment. Once we kind of move attachment out of our mind through reflection and death and impermanence, through seeing more clearly these four blind spots in our life, then we can start to access what's going on with the ignorance in our mind. You know, how's that functioning? So the next wrong concept we have, blind spot, is that we tend to habitually grasp at suffering to be happiness. Right, like the chocolate cake. I'm sure we've heard that example again and again, you know. So like, you know, like any other enjoyments, they're nice. Chocolate cake's great if you have one slice. Maybe it's great if you have two slices. But after 3 or 4 slices, well, we're feeling a bit sick, you know. We've got full stomachs, we're not feeling well, we might even vomit, we're putting on weight, it's not good for the body and mind, it's not good for anything. So the key point is here, if the chocolate cake from its own side was happiness and bliss and joy and all the things that we project out onto it, then the more we partook of that, the greater happiness we would experience. Same going to the beach, you know. Oh, it's so nice, the skin on my, you know, the sun on my face. But if we sit there too long, we get burnt, you know. So we can only, so what that's showing is it's very soon afterwards, the sense enjoyments that we have all have this nature where they turn into suffering. But if their ultimate nature was happiness, the more we had them, the more happiness we would experience. So it's our hallucinated mind, ignorance and the attachment that clings to those objects that stops us from seeing the reality of that object. It doesn't mean that we can't enjoy the chocolate cake, you know. We're not saying, okay, you need to give up chocolate cake, you need to, it's not that, you know. Renunciation or that wisdom that sees that, the reality of the chocolate cake, that's what we need to develop, you know. So that's, and again, reflection on death and impermanence, what it does is it starts to break down these concepts of how we perceive, you know, a reality or immediate reality, day to day, minute to minute, moment to moment. And again, if we don't think about death and impermanence regularly, we'll spend a lot of time on these objects, you know, just creating happiness through material pleasures, sense pleasures. We'll spend too much time. So death and impermanence, kind of that meditation, it reels that in. It reels that kind of grasping, clinging mind in a healthy way. Okay, so next, so the next misconception, wrong concept, blind spot. And this is the main one, of course, that we're discussing here. The obvious one is that we tend to cling as things to be permanent when they're impermanent, or the impermanent to be permanent. Like, oh, I got a permanent job, I got a permanent, you know, I got permanent this. We tend to feel like things have a permanency, when in reality, everything's in the nature of impermanence. So again, that sense of permanency, again, causes us to sort of delay our Dharma practice, you know. Permanent as in I'm going to live a long time, I've got plenty of time, you know, this is going to go on forever. So again, not harmonizing ourselves with the impermanence of life, the nature of the kind of the fact that death can really happen to us at any time. We don't know when it's going to be. So without doing that, we tend to cling because things appear to us as solid and concrete. Things appear to, you know, just without doing any kind of analysis or thought, how things appear in our minds is very solid and concrete. Even our thoughts that we know on some level drift through, but we still cling to them as solid and concrete. This is my view, this is my thought, this is who I am. But we know that thoughts don't have a solid concrete nature, but we still tend to cling. So, you know, without reflection and permanence, then we sort of cheat ourselves, you know. We allow our mind to just cling to things as being permanent. We allow our mind just to go with whatever's appearing to the mind. So it's like Lama Zopa Rinpoche used to say, we cheat ourselves by not checking up through more analysis to how things actually exist, you know. So we need to analyze, we need to use these reflections, we need to think about quotes from great holy beings for the past, meditate on them and shift our perception of reality. And again, this first perception that we're shifting is from the permanent to the impermanent. You know, my aunt actually had she passed away some years ago, but when I was first met the Dharma, she was maybe in her 40s. She was diagnosed with cancer. And at that time, she wasn't really kind of spiritually, you know, in a sense, like, you know, open to spirituality as such. But when she was diagnosed, she started asking me about Buddhism. She became interested, and she went up to Orkney, a place in Scotland, and she was fascinated by the Christian monastery there. And so she sort of opened up a little bit when she kind of heard that, you know, she had cancer, this thought that she might, you know, she could pass away. So anyway, but, you know, fortunately, she lived for some 15 years since her first diagnosis, because she had so many, you know, she had many different therapies, and she went through chemo about 5 or 6 times, but each time she had the chemo, she recovered, and she had a few years of, you know, a relatively healthy, good life. And then it would come back again. So this process went on for 15 years. And it actually, you know, I think my mother said to me, I think she got to the point where she thought she wasn't going to die, because she kept getting better, you know, she kept recovering every time she got sick, and she just felt like, well, they're always going to find a solution. You know, I'm always going to, you know, each time I, you know, take the treatment, it's helped me so far, so I think I'm just going to keep going. So she was actually, she had quite a difficult death, because she developed in her mind some idea that she was going to live forever. So again, if we don't consider, kind of do these meditations on impermanence and death, that kind of feeling of permanence, if we don't check that with these meditations, that takes over, you know, and it really cheats us and stops us from doing what's meaningful in life. So the last wrong concept, and again, this is more relating to how we perceive ourselves right now, you know, so we perceive a truly existent self, and we perceive all phenomena to be sort of truly existent, when in reality, everything is selfless. So again, this is the hardest one, as I say, for us to get to, but this is our reality all the time. We perceive ourselves, others, and phenomena to have this sort of concrete self-existent nature. Because of that, we develop attachment. Because of that, we feel, you know, that all influences how we feel in terms of feeling like we're this concrete, solid person that's going to go on and on forever. Not this fluid, transitory person that's subject to causes and conditions, then that will pass away this life, but still carry on in future lives, you know, in a different form. So, but because, you know, so what meditation and death and impermanence done, again, it's starting to chip away at that wrong view of self, starting to chip away at the clinging mind of attachment. As Lama Yeshe used to say, this grasping mind. You couldn't say grasping properly. They used to call it grasping, which used to make the students all jump with laughter, you know, so it was very cute. And again, we have, you know, so right now, again, what the mind of attachment creates, what the mind of ignorance creates is this kind of sense of me, myself, and I being the most precious one, the most important. Which, you know, even on a logical level doesn't make sense because we are one and all sentient beings are massive, you know, extensive, limitless. But somehow everybody feels like, to a level, you know, of course we have a good heart, we try to benefit others, but there's this kind of deep sense of our self-importance, you know, and our self-existence, you know, that's a deluded sense of self, you know. So again, the meditation on death and impermanence is the beginning of chipping away at that wrong view of self. So it's so important, you know. It's like this really, really important foundation. So again, going back to Rinpoche's quote, the second part of Rinpoche's quote. So again, if we don't, you know, we don't think about, we don't have a sort of any view of death, then we tend to, what happens is we tend to think that we don't have to prepare for death. Again, this can be quite close to the Western feeling. You know, we're probably again, this is where we're a little bit influenced maybe by our culture and how we've been brought up, where generally, you know, I was never taught until I met Buddhism that we have to do any preparation for death. It depends what circumstances you're brought up in, but many of us may not have really been given any guidance when we're younger about how to think about death, and that it's important to prepare for death, and how do we do that? So the other thing is, if we don't think about death and impermanence, we don't use that analytical meditation, we may think that the only purpose in life is to enjoy yourself as much as possible. So again, that's coming from the power of attachment in our mind, you know. Definitely ignorance too, but it's this power of attachment, again, clinging to, well, what we see as happiness, but is actually suffering, you know, the chocolate cake, the beach, the holidays, you know, again, you know, without thinking, really recognizing future lives, thinking about the continuity of consciousness, then, you know, from many Western viewpoints, then we just enjoy ourselves as much as possible because there's nothing afterwards, you know. So again, without the light of Dharma, understanding the nature of death and rebirth will naturally look to the pleasures of this life. That's kind of what our mind tends to do, that without much effort, right? I mean, me personally, even as a Buddhist nun, I mean, the habit of the mind is to kind of go for comfort, you know, temporary happiness, you know, to label that as kind of the main happiness, you know. So that's where our mind easily goes, you know. So this meditation on death and impermanence pulls it in, pulls that mind of attachment, that lazy mind in, and tries to really clarify and put a light on what the purpose of life really is, you know. And also in light of continuity consciousness, the first module, where we have this mind stream that's moving from life to life, we need to take care of that. Yes, Eleanor, did you have a...
Sorry, I was just clearing my throat. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay, so next slide. So everyone has the idea that death, this is from Lama Tsongkhapa, everyone has the idea that death will come later at the end. However, with each passing day, people think, I will not die today. I will not die today, clinging to this thought until the moment of death. If you're obstructed by such an attitude and don't bring its remedy to mind, you will continue to think that you will remain in this life. So again, it's a little bit like the example of my aunt, you know, who, because she kept finding the cure, you know, she kept recovering. There's this kind of ongoing thought, if we don't check it, that we'll live another day, we'll live another day, you know. That's just where the mind naturally goes. And again, what happens is if we don't check again, we continually postpone our practice. You know, the kind of works of this life, the busyness of this life looks more important. So again, the Geshe Chanawa, so there was these great Kadampa practitioners starting from Lama Tisha, I think around the 11th century. So he started this Kadam lineage of practitioners who really did some incredible, you know, that was their first practice, reflecting on death and impermanence. They used that as a basis, as like the pivot to, you know, pivot them into the, you know, developing the higher realizations. So they were known for being very kind of humble, simple practitioners because they you know, the basis of their practice was deep reflection in death and impermanence. So they were really able to give up, you know, in a very healthy way, you know, a very happy mind, peaceful mind, give up this life, give up the attachments to this life, and create so much space in their life for practice, devote themselves single-pointedly to practice. So one of these practitioners was Geshe Chanawa, and he said, if you don't do a reflection on permanence and death in the morning, I think you will devote the whole day to this life. Sound familiar? Any thoughts on that?
I think about when you do Vajrasattva practice.
Yes.
And you go through all the like I did so many wrong. I had so many wrong views in all my lives, and then one of them, which you say that I might die today, because if I die now, my practice wasn't complete and I can go to the lower realm. I thought it was, it is very like, it makes you awake from your illusion of the day, because during the day you are working, you are doing every kind of action sometimes. Yeah. And when you do your Vajrasattva practice, you say, oh, yes, that may come. But actually, I think it's more helpful if we do it, I personally, at morning time. Because during the day, I'm thinking, oh, yeah, it's not very far.
It's very true, Ladanya. I mean, that's why Geshe Chanawa said it's good to think about it in the morning. And it's true, I can definitely say for myself, you know, if I don't, I think it is one of the most powerful ways to really check our mind for the day. I mean, as we go through in the coming weeks, you know, on how you reflect on death and impermanence, I mean, just having this thought, well, I could die today, you know, and you know, using some of the other contemplations to make it real, to make it your truth. Right now, it might just be a thought floating up there and we don't really believe it. It's like, yeah, well, I could die today, but I don't really believe it, because we haven't done enough inner reflection. It's not our truth yet, you know. But when we go through these meditations and you think about it every morning, you reflect in different ways, or even just doing a little bit every morning, after a year, you might start to believe, like, yeah, maybe I could die today. It's really true, you know, because things are impermanent, my life, my body, and I really don't know what the day is going to bring, you know. There's so many people die all the time unexpectedly. Most people probably die unexpectedly. So why not me? So as you say, the idea is really to think about it in the morning, but of course it's good to think about it at night as well. Generally, what they say, you have to think about death and impermanence at the beginning of your practice. So when you're beginning in the path, like Milarepa, he went to the mountains because he thought about death and impermanence. That sort of pivoted him up to the mountains. Then during his time in the mountains, he spent 25 years with a lot of difficulty, a lot of obstacle, eating nettles, we can't imagine. So he thought about death and impermanence in the middle of his practice, and that keeps you going. You don't give up, because you know you have to face death, you know, and you want to overcome it. And then he thought about death and impermanence at the end. It helped him to complete his practice. So it's not like we do this and then we've done that and it's done. You know, these great masters, all of us, we have to think about it all the time, you know. The beginning of our practice, as you say, ideally think about the beginning, and then when you nod off to sleep at night, if we can even think, you know, well, I don't know, I might not wake up this morning. And again, we do some other reflections, it starts to be true. I mean, I did have an experience in my very early days when I was really meditating a lot in the Lam room. Of course, I still try to meditate now, but I did one retreat where I was really, you know, for 3 months, I was doing Vajrasattva retreat, actually, as you mentioned, Ladan, and I was really meditating on death and impermanence and precious human rebirth. And I remember I came down one evening to have dinner, and there was a friend or someone was talking about, you know, in 6 weeks' time, I'm going to do such and such and such. And somehow in that moment, I was like, are they crazy? How do they know they're going to live in 6 weeks? And it was really, I mean, it wasn't a judgment to that person, but it was just like, I was kind of so in the moment of meditating, doing these reflections on death and impermanence, but I really felt some fragility of the life. Of course, I don't know if I feel that now. You have to carry on all the time. But I did have this experience where it was like that person was like, it was like they were crazy or something. How could they even think that, you know, because you don't know what's going to happen. So it's definitely possible that these reflections can change your mind. And it's not a heavy thing. It's a liberating thought, you know. It's like because you open up to the reality of things, you know. So next, what's it? So anyway, with all these attitudes, you know, of thinking we're going to live forever, as Rimshi was saying, then with such attitudes, we may become careless and fail to do what is really important. You know, if we just allow our mind to think we could live forever, you know, then it's, you know, or allow us to think that we don't have to prepare for death. You know, if we just let our mind there, then we kind of, again, as Rimshi says, we cheat ourselves, you know. And in the light of precious human rebirth, in the light that we have this potential to shift our minds, you know, move our minds, even into spaces of bodhicitta, even in realizing its natural state, you know, emptiness, we have these precious opportunities. So in that light, we wouldn't want to go to our next life empty-handed. It would be like doing that. We would kind of lose an opportunity by not kind of binding our mind in this kind of thought of death and impermanence, you know, really trying to harmonize with that mind. If we don't, we'll just let these attitudes kind of take over, permeate our life more than the thought of death and impermanence. So it's again, like they say in the Lam Rim, if we don't think about death and impermanence, we will lose out on this golden opportunity to develop these 3 levels of spiritual happiness. You know, so once we know about this, we kind of feel like, well, we have a responsibility, you know, we've received these teachings, we know that we have this potential. So in the light of, I don't know when I'm going to pass away, I need to make it a wee bit more prominent, you know, urgent in my life. These practices, and this, you know, to be able to do whatever we do the best to serve sentient beings and to serve ourselves by spending time to reflect, meditate, on the teachings, you know, trying to develop them in our hearts and minds when and as we can in our life. But the death and impermanence meditations really spur us on, you know, they help us to develop this kind of true grit, you know. It gives a certain power to the mind and a certain energy to be able to do more practice in a healthy way. So another reason why it's important to contemplate death, because it reduces an unhealthy fear of death, that unhealthy fear of the unknown. We're kind of coming face to face with it, instead of just putting it to the side or not being really clear about what it is. We're being very brave and sort of facing death, you know. And, you know, even as Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, you know, the more we think about death, it can be a bit uncomfortable in the beginning, some of the meditations and reflections, but the more we think about it actually, and we start to shift, because again, what it's working on is the mindy attachment. Now, the mindy attachment it's a clinging mind, and it creates, how would you say, unbalance in the mind, or kind of tightness in the mind. And it creates fear and expectation when we check up. You know, it creates a lot of difficulties in our life. So what this death and reflection and death and impermanence is doing is chipping away at that mindy attachment. And as that's chipped away, what naturally comes up is our natural sense of peace and tranquility. That's a natural state of mind. The other benefit of meditating on death and impermanence is that it lessens our attachments. It also allows us to be more generous, you know. It opens up more a kind of mind of generosity. Again, we're not being asked to give away all our possessions when we think about death and impermanence, but it allows us to be less clinging to our things because we see the impermanent nature of ourselves. We understand we can't take them with us at the time of death, our friends, our family. So it doesn't mean that we don't love them any less, but it does help with certainly attachments and emotions around families can be quite difficult. And usually emotions around family are difficult because there's a sort of, so it seems to be also almost an innate sense of attachment with the family. You know, it's not an easy one. So the more we reflect on that, it kind of chips away, it kind of smooths that mindy attachment. This can be quite painful. Fear and expectation. So again, as we move into this, we'll go over a little bit also the teaching on the 8 worldly concerns, because that all involves kind of how our attachment manifests through our worldly concerns and how through meditating on death and impermanence can really heal some of those minds, really act as a strong antidote. Again, you know, a very key one is that, you know, in relation to precious human life, along with death and impermanence, it can make us really, really appreciate our life. We appreciate the kind of every moment. So sometimes what people do, because it's not easy to have the thought that we might die tomorrow. That's a very difficult thought. It's very difficult to get that level of feeling in our meditation. But we can kind of have some vision or idea that we might die. You know, we could imagine that, you know, we go to the doctors, we've had some stomach pain for a while or some back pain, and then we're diagnosed with cancer or we can sort of imagine that happening. Maybe it's happened to some of us already, you know. We've come close to death already. And that experience allows us to appreciate what time we have left. So that's what the reflection in death and impermanence does. It sort of allows us to appreciate the time that we have here. It wakens us up to the preciousness of this life in this moment. As I say, like near-death experiences, and it can also be a very strong motivating, you know, again, it's a very strong motivating factor, that reflection on death and impermanence, that feeling that I don't know how long I've got to live, and that, you know, could happen at any moment. So I've got, you know, I just have this day almost, I just have this time. So it really motivates us to make the best use of our time. So I remember as well one time when I was working in Rimshi's house and I had a lot of cleaning to do, and somehow I arrived at Rimshi's house and you know, for my 3rd time of being there, and I got all the kind of all the cleaning jobs. There was a few Sangha, but I think when you're last to arrive, you get all the cleaning jobs, you know, the ones that people don't want to do. And I was feeling a bit grumpy about it somehow. Not totally grumpy, but a bit like, oh, I don't know if I want to do all this cleaning and do. I wasn't appreciating that it's so precious to be at Rimshi's house. You know, I was kind of more sometimes complaining about too much cleaning, or, I mean, these are small things. But so one evening I was actually driving to Ocean and Compassion. I don't think Bae she wasn't the SPC at the time. And I had an accident on Highway 17. One car came over the opposite side of the road and banged into me, and I was smashed against the side. And I passed this huge truck, and you know, and I was like jammed by one car, and I just had this thought, oh my God, where's that huge truck? And I looked around and it was just able to stop in time, because otherwise I would have been sandwiched. So anyway, I had this whole scenario like, oh my God, I almost died or was in this really serious accident. And I was still taken to an ambulance came, I was still taken to the hospital. I had a few small injuries, but nothing too much. But in the light of what could have happened, it was so interesting in the ambulance. First of all, I was so grateful for the people in the ambulance. And then it was somehow like all this kind of complaining, moaning mind came up about, oh, I can't believe I've got the cleaning and do. And it was just like, gosh, I'm so, and then I just felt like I'm so fortunate to be there. I don't know. It just brought this whole light on the situation of like how fortunate I am to be at Rimshi's house, and it doesn't matter what I'm doing. through that experience, and maybe being in a situation where I could have died or really had a really serious injury where I wouldn't have been able to do it. Anyone else had an experience like that? Where a near-death experience or something, you know. Yes, Stan.
I not for myself necessarily, but I was reflecting on the idea of someone very close to me. My wife, for example, who died 8 years ago of cancer, and 2 years after that, my twin brother died suddenly without too much warning. And just having those deaths really close to me in a close proximity of time really brought home the impermanence of things in a very strongly emotional way. And I thought, it's not like one could still say, yeah, them, but not me. But for me, it was really bringing home the idea that we're all on that train. We're all susceptible to that event.
Yes, thanks for sharing. I don't know about you, Stan, but what happened to me at that time as well, it was so pertinent how fortunate, you know, when the accident happened, because I saw what could have happened, it didn't. But it was like, wow, if that truck had just been, because I managed to do a lot, I had quite a big, you know, when I passed the truck, I made sure I had a lot of stopping distance, but it was this huge big truck, and it was like, it literally just braked right behind me. And I was just like, what? I mean, it was just so pertinent, this thought of like, I could have just almost died there. And I think that's kind of what you're trying to get in the death and impermanence.
Yes.
It's like that thought of, it's not easy. And I remember thinking, if I could just stay like this, you know. But, you know, the next day you sort of go back, your delusions kick in again, and here I am, and it's all okay, and I'll last for another while again. But just in that moment, and I think that's what happens when near-death experiences, you know, you go through this process and it's like, ping, like my life is so fortunate. And I think that's the kind of sense we're trying to get with these reflections, that preciousness of being alive. Anyone else want to share?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So about 3 years ago, I had a bad accident. I fell through the shower and severed the artery, and I was bleeding very badly, and I felt that I was going to die, you know, and that was an amazing experience, actually. It was like just letting go. You know, I was very lucky that I had the ambulance people who came to me pretty quickly, or you know,
Yes.
and stop the bleeding. But yeah, it was a very salutary experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, and sometimes these, you know, as I say, these near-death experiences, it's actually for many people a blessing in disguise, because it can completely change their life around, you know. I watched a documentary about 2 people who passed, and one person, it was really interesting because one lady, when she was in a boating trip, and she kind of was drowning, and they got her out of the ocean, and she lost her breath, you know, and she said she had an experience of coming out of her body. And she was going into the light, so I think she was going into a positive rebirth, but she could see them resuscitating her, and she went back into her body. But then it's still sort of something happened where her, that experience had transformed her life and changed her life. And there was another individual in the same documentary. He went into a totally different experience of going into a hell realm. So he was shot in the head. He was walking along the street in LA, and all he felt was this piercing heat at the back of his head, and he was shot in the head. Or it might have just skimmed past, you know, probably if it was through the head, he would have died. But he got some sort of headshot, and he experienced it as, and they did all this sort of imagery, you know, they made a small video of it, because he explained going into a hell, this dark, frightening place where it was going to last forever, and he was so afraid, and there was chains, and there was guardians, and it was like, wow. And he was not religious. He was just talking about what happened to him. But then what happened, and he felt like he was there forever, but this hand came in, this white hand came in and pulled him out. And that's when he regained consciousness. So I thought, wow, that's a great video actually for a Buddhist class, because one lady was going into a clear light and what seemed like a good rebirth, he went right into a hell. And that's what happens when you go into a hell rebirth. You go straight there. You don't go into the bardo, you go straight into the hell. But again, he came back again, his karma was to come out. But it particularly affected him, and he changed his life a huge way as well, making it more, most often people come out of that and they do things, you know, they spend their life more devoted to others, you know, it opens their heart in some way. So I found that fascinating, because none of them were particularly religious, and they had these kind of diverse experiences, again, which match with what the teachings say in Buddhism about the different types of rebirths you can take, you know. A couple of examples anyway.
Jo
So,
had,
yes,
Jo had
yes.
her hand up.
Oh, Jo, yes.
What was I going to say? I think for me here, I see the advantage of really engaging with the Dharma, because if you you understand it, you learn it, and you put it into practice in your everyday life, then perhaps these extreme, you know, to use the term near-death experiences won't need to happen in this lifetime, because you know, because it seems to me that sometimes they happen to give people a nudge. So I'm assuming now, Angie, that when there's a whole range of jobs to do wherever you are, you're the first one in the queue for the cleaning jobs.
Well, I don't know if I kept that perspective as fresh as I should have done, but I did gradually. I always, you know, I definitely appreciate my time that I did all the cleaning at Rimshay's house. There's no question. I'm not
But it could be
always in line for the cleaning jobs, but
it's a strategy you could consider.
yes, definitely. Yeah. But yeah, no, it's very precious to have that experience, actually, definitely, you know, because it totally, it's for most people, it can transform their life. So again, these reflections are kind of where we want to get to, you know, having that sense of, you know, my life is so precious, I could die at any moment, and opening our hearts. That's what it does. It opens our hearts, because like me, every being. And again, it creates more compassion, because sometimes our loving kind, you know, our kind of compassion for everybody, what we call compassion, can be limited, can be kind, but we don't have a really big view of what compassion is. So our compassion for people starts from the basis of understanding that we're all in this process of birth and death together, that every being is going to have to face the death process. If you're born into this world, whether human or animal, you have to face this process, and you have to face a future rebirth. And what does that look like? So that's where compassion really starts to open and blossom, is on this basis of understanding our own fragility, our own impermanence, and that of other beings. That really opens up. That's where the mind starts to open up. So again, what we want to try and do with these reflections is, instead of feeling it's death's a scary place, these reflections start to help us feel like it's a close friend, you know, somewhere where we're definitely going to go, we're definitely going to meet that state. And again, once we go through, in one of the classes, we'll go through the whole death process. That's something we can start to get more familiar with as well in our meditations.
Melanie has her hand up.
Melanie?
I'll just add briefly, because I had an experience where I'm from Montana, right? So small
Yes.
roads. And I was almost in a head-on crash, and like seconds away from it. And what was most distressing to me afterwards was not, you know, after I calmed down a little bit, was my reaction and the anger that came up. And I was angry at that person that, you know, had pulled out in front of me, and thought, oh, this is not the mind I want to die with. That's actually what's prompted me to come here, you know, and learn the practices, so that, you know, so that I can have a more calm mind, I hope, when that moment arises again. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that, Melanie. That's really honest of you. Because yeah, I mean, well, that's good. Again, so you could say that was a blessing in disguise, because it's prompted you, it's motivated you to come and go through this, understand death more, and hopefully be in a better place at the death time. So it's wonderful. It's almost like a near-death experience, isn't it? It had a different effect for you, you know. But still, it's prompting you into spiritual matters and to understand death, and hopefully, yeah, be a better person, more calm, everything. That's great. not everything can be an opportunity, right, in these set of teachings, especially when you know we have the tools how to work with it. So there's nothing that's, eventually, I'm certainly not there yet, but eventually with all these praxis, the more we develop the Lam Rim, everything becomes an opportunity. Everything becomes just for the, what's it, grill for the gist for the grill, is that right? So that's the idea eventually. So again, if we're being honest, why should I be afraid of death? Because when the Lord of Death comes, it will be, as you're saying, this is a great time where you brought this in, it can be difficult for our mind to be happy. So we want to prepare for that. We want to have a happy mind at the time of death. So I think because, let me see what the next slide is. Do we want to keep going, or I think what we'll do next week, because we're on 8:26, is I'll start with next week. I just wanted to talk about what the 3 levels of spiritual practitioners are, but we'll drop into that next week. And we'll also drop into, how we start thinking. So how do we start really reflecting on death? In what way, what are the techniques, what are the methods we use, So there's 3 main methods, and they're all split up into 3 parts. So it's kind of the 9-point death meditation. So we'll go into that a wee bit more next week. So again, just to finish, is there any last question? Comment?
Yes.
Stan?
Yes. You had mentioned last time, and even this time as well, the idea of reflection and meditation. And we've been talking about reflection tonight quite a bit. And I'm just trying to discern, like, I wonder if you could just talk about what's the actual, the distinction between, you say, listen, reflect, and meditate.
Yeah.
So I've listened. I'm certainly reflecting and appreciating you so much for these teachings. But also, how do I put that into my meditation, I guess is my question. Can you speak about the reflection versus meditation?
So general reflection is a little bit more what you're saying now, reflection, under that can also come reading. When you read something and you reflect on, the thing is, it's still a meditation. If you're really, reflection, it depends where we are, but if we're reflecting and it's moving our mind in a certain way, then that's a type of meditation. To me, it's not like they're like, oh, only this is reflection and only that's me. It's not really that clearly defined, but you can see there's a process where we're sort of listening and reflecting. And then I guess what meditation's really doing when we sit and we do more formal practice, maybe reciting prayers like we did in the beginning, then we contemplate one aspect of death, like the body's fragile. So because of that, we could, we don't know how, it could be, something could happen to it and we could pass away really easily. That's one aspect of the death reflection. So that would be more like when you're sitting on the cushion, you read something, you think about something, and then you really try and bring it deeper into your heart. So meditation's a bit more like when it starts to get deeper and deeper into your consciousness. So we have these first limbs of like listening and reflection, and so it's going in, and even through reflection, as I say, I think it can still, can still touch you quite deeply. But meditation's kind of making it a reality in a way, It's like really making it our conscious day and night experience. But again, what's meditation? It's becoming familiar with a state of mind. Yes. Making our mind familiar. So listening and reflection is already doing that. Meditation's just internalizing it more deeply. So it becomes it's like your reality as it is for these, like the Buddha. The Buddha looks at us and goes, these people are crazy. They think they're going to live forever. We omniscient mind who sees all phenomena, who sees emptiness, who sees that we're in this process of samsara, they have so much compassion for us because we don't see that about ourselves. It's a bit like looking at your kids and like if they go and do certain things, they're going to hurt themselves. But sometimes you just have to watch and let them go through the process a little bit, but you have a lot of compassion for them because that's going to be harmful for them. It's kind of like that. That's how the Buddhas look at us, because they have these realizations that we don't have. you know, and as a parent, we have certain realizations just through going through childhood of how, you know, of things that children don't have. But it's much, much more profound than that, you know, the realizations of the Buddhas. So it's kind of like meditation brings it into our visceral, direct experience and realization. Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, so let's just do dedications. And then we finish in a couple of minutes. Go back to the practice. The dedications are on there. Okay, so we realize the dedicate to realize bodhicitta, and within this we can also think, you know, the goal in the Lam Rim, the gradual path to enlightenment, is to realize these two precious bodhicittas. Ultimate bodhicitta, which encompasses the wisdom realizing emptiness, the wisdom realizing the nature of our mind and all sentient beings' minds and all phenomena, and also this precious mind of bodhicitta that basically embraces and loves and has a skill to benefit sentient beings, you know. So we dedicate to develop these two in this verse. Chanju senjo rinpoche, mage panam ye gyurshik, ye ba nyamba me ba yi, gone gondu pelwar shuk. And then His Holiness's long life prayer we'll do in English. Incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling Jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, may you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And also just wanted to dedicate also for this this swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, for that to be most auspicious for his next incarnation. And then also for our own prayers and to be fulfilled. And I will send to Bay, maybe tomorrow, the reading list. There's also a really wonderful video of Lama Zopa Rinpoche teaching on death and impermanence. It's about 50 minutes. So even if you're able to watch 10, 15 minutes every week, that would be great if you could get through that. So I'll send the link for that as well. And of course, if you've got any questions, you can always contact me. Bay has my email. So if you want to get that and you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bay.
Angie.
Thank you, Angie.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.